Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome back to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. This is Chris Parker, and I am speaking with Kristjan Knigge. And before we go any further, I really have to give a shout out because Kristjan is the creative power behind making these podcasts, audios and videos happen. So in principle, he's been involved in every single episode. And he was actually on as a guest early on. So this might be the first time I have the same person on twice as a conversation. There's been some people that have been on.
You've been on twice.
I've been on
twice.
I've been on twice.
Well, you've been on 103 times, but you've been on twice as a guest.
Yeah, that's true. Well, true enough. And then there's in 2 weeks. So just released before this episode, Mark Prinsky will be on twice because he has two parts of his conversation.
It's kind of one split into two, yeah. That's
one split into two. And then like Rainier was on interviewing me, and then I interviewed him. So he was on twice. So, but anyways, this is the first time that I think we're really leaning into twice. So
a repeat guest. And is this because you're running out and you're scraping the barrel, or why are we doing this?
Absolutely not. I'm actually probably irritating a lot of people because there's a huge backlog that we wanted to have this episode, which is coming out just after Filmapalooza and just after one of our films is screening at a festival. And so actually it was, let's push some of the other promises back a little bit. Sorry, people, because we're going to slot this in, I think, on the 22nd of March, if my mind is correct. So it'll be the Monday after the Filmapalooza. And the reason is a bit selfishly because I have been invited to, as a producer, talk at Filmapalooza about filmmaking. And they already have some directors on that panel. And a lot of the Longship method and the core of it is really coming from your inspiration. And so this is a little bit selfish for me, so I can rehear the story and also point them, from the panel.
So this is just homework because you're on a panel with some interesting people. That's what this is. Okay, you're swatting up.
There is definitely a homework element here, and I'm going to be saying if you want to hear the creative part of the story, really, look at this episode. So cool. Let's jump into it.
And we can use this episode to promote screening of Exposure, which is our second Longship film, because that will be, I'm just double checking, that will be on the 4th of April. So people who are watching this is coming out on the 22nd. Hello, everybody. The Aravalli Film Festival in India, which is aravallifilmfestival.in, is a fantastic film festival with films from all over the world. Of course, this year they're online, and they will be screening Exposure. I think it's the second last film of their screening, and it will screen on April the 4th. And I'm not sure of the time yet because the time on their schedule is a range of time, and it's the time in India, so I'm not sure. But we'll links and things, I guess.
We will put links and things in the show notes. But Kristjan Knigge.
Yes, hello.
What do you do, and why do you do what you do?
I'm a filmmaker. I guess the easy answer is because I don't know anything else to do. I've always grown up around film and film sets, and ever since I was a small child, that is what I wanted to do. The answer now that I've been doing it for a long time and am a grown up, heading towards becoming hopefully an adult, is because telling stories that touch people, that reach people, that engender an emotion and thought and discussion and all of those things is amazing. It's glorious. It's wonderful. It's so much fun. I guess I do what I do because it's a huge amount of fun.
It's a huge amount of fun, and you touch people. I think it was 2 years ago, the Flyway Film Festival in Wisconsin, when Exposure, the latest film, was premiered, and there was a lady in the back of the audience.
Yeah, I remember her.
Raised her hand. Can you share that moment from your memory?
Yeah, well, Exposure's it's an odd beast. It's a film that film festivals are having a hard time programming because it's a weird length. It's 50 minutes, which is kind of a non-programmable length for most festivals. It's also very non-linear. It's experimental. It's an odd beast to show. But Flyway, which is very much part of the Longship journey and very much part of my journey as a filmmaker, the Flyway Film Festival is amazing and wonderful, and they screened the film. And it engendered a huge amount of conversation. Wonderful, beautiful, heartfelt conversations happened. There were people in the crowd that knew me and knew Chad, our cinematographer. There were people in the crowd who had seen us filming parts of the film. So it was kind of a very nice, familial almost feeling. But right at the end of the Q&A, there was like, okay, we have time for one more question. And a young lady stood up right at the back of the room. And she wasn't from the area. She wasn't from the region. She didn't know me. She didn't know anybody. She was literally just, somebody who'd come in and thought, hey, that looks like a fun film. I'll go watch it. And, with a crackle in her voice, she said, this film speaks to me. This is me. This is one of the first films I've ever seen that is about me and who I am. And thank you so much. And I think I said to you and Chad right there, well, that's it, job done. I mean, if nobody in the world ever again sees this film, the fact that girl, who I didn't speak to after the show, I mean, I sort of looked around and see if she was there, but we didn't find each other. But didn't matter. It was glorious. So that's what one hopes to do with films.
Yeah, I don't think it was supposed to be, because I was in the back and was recording the Q&A, and I'd even stopped recording because I thought we were done. And
right.
then this just sort of happened. And then,
so we don't even have a record of this.
No, but there's just this beautiful moment happened. And I think it was just meant to be just that moment. And, I see that. That's also what one of the joys for me is to see how an audience experiences the film in the cinema. I just love that. Now, Exposure could have been a complete failure, and having shot the first part, it could have just ended up in the bin. However,
it very, very almost did. Yeah, it very almost did.
So we shared a little bit of that. That's the whole backstory on.
Yeah. Well, we were super pumped with our success of Second Honeymoon, our first Longship film. Not that it was a commercial success or it wasn't, it didn't get rave reviews or have a massive festival thing. But the success was that it worked. We had this idea to go out and shoot a movie in a kind of new and fresh and unique way. And we came back and we actually had a movie which had a story, and it had characters, and it had engaging storyline, and it even had a subplot, and it had all the things that you want from a film. And in fact, the second film was made off of the back of a screening of Second Honeymoon in Wisconsin. So off we went to do that again, and I think I was a little bit overconfident in that. Oh well, this works. This is going to be great no matter what we do. So mea culpa for that. So I kind of rushed into a very complicated, convoluted, multi-layered story that we were trying to tell, that didn't work within the framework of how we were trying to tell it. So as Chris always says, this, our method, if we want to call it a method, works for certain types of films, and we have to be very aware of the limitations of what you can do with it. There are ways of building a thing that are great, but that doesn't mean you can build all iterations of that thing in that way. You have to, different tools, different methodologies, different systems for different results. So we entered into this, and it was amazing. It was tough going filming. We were filming just on the turn of autumn into winter. And it was cold, and it was wet, and it was miserable. And we were, of course, a tiny, tiny team of 5 or 6 people. Not a full production where we had, trucks and gear and stuff. We didn't. It was, me holding up an umbrella over the actress as she was getting ready for her scenes and stuff like that. So, but still, we came back with incredibly beautiful footage, some amazing performances from Geertke van Lierop, who played one of the main characters. And I went into the edit with Jelle, and we spent a long time trying to shape it into a full story. Months and months and months and months. I mean, not continuously, because we both working on other projects, but coming back to it. And it didn't want to be a film. It just didn't want to be a film. So I kind of said, well, okay. I mean, we always said from the beginning, it's experimental. It might not work. I remember having a huge, long discussion about failure in the Q&A, after a screening of Second Honeymoon, and saying, well, there's nothing wrong with failure. Because allowing oneself to fail also allows oneself to take risks, to try new things. You can't try new things unless you are willing for them not to work. So I was kind of at peace with, okay, this is a failure. But I did have all this lovely, lovely footage, that seemed like a waste if we just threw it away. So I called a meeting of a couple people, Geertke and Chris and BJ, who's the art director, and Jackie, the writer, and we got together here in Amsterdam because I wanted to have a face-to-face, and we sat down in a very cold and miserable night, and we had a very cold and miserable meeting. It was a very sort of a bad mood, grumpy meeting. I remember you, Chris, going, what is going on? We're supposed to be planning something, but this is just sort of, because everybody was a bit, I don't know, depressed about it or something. But it did lead to this idea. And I remember being outside and chatting, I can't remember with who, I think it was with you, and then running back in and saying, but guys, what if we just write a new film? What if we take the bits that really work from the footage that we have and use them in this totally different context? Let's brainstorm if there's a context to be found. And we found one. So the original story was about the relationship between a woman and her mother, and her mother was dead. So she was going around recreating these photographs in which her mother was in the photograph. So we had a character who only existed as these beautiful black and white prints. Luckily, we'd kept in contact with that actress who played that, Erica Anderson, who was living in LA at the time. And we could rework her character to not be, because she didn't exist yet in the movie, except on these pictures. We could rework her character, and then it became this story about a breakup. So then we just super easy, flew Erica and Chad from America down to the Algarve, and Geertke and I and Jelle went down there, and we got BJ back on the team, and we shot the other half of the movie. So this exposure actually became sort of two longship journeys smushed into one to make one very unprogrammable 50-minute film, and that's kind of how that happened. And I think it's marvelous. I think it's wonderful, and it really works. It really is a film that has a backbone, has a story, and has genuine sort of something that people can connect to, because it's this tiny little event in these people's lives, but put under a magnifying glass, I guess, and brought out. Was that a very, very long-winded, boring answer to your question?
Well, it was actually a very short synopsis of like a year of effort and journey and marathon.
A year or two, yeah.
Yeah, so you can say it was long or very short.
Fair enough.
One moment that really pops out in my mind is because most of that was a creative journey, which is where I like to dabble in, when possible. And I remember you were over at Jelle's, I think, struggling with the final edit, trying to stitch it all together. And that's when I said, well, if this was a corporate meeting, I would recommend sticky notes right about now, so you can actually start moving stuff around. And then when I came back another time, you guys had actually, I think you even printed the little stills representing each scene, and you had them all mapped out, and you were storyboarding them and stitching them together and stuff. And it was,
well, it was really funny. Your comment. What was beautiful was your comment coming from your sort of corporate IT-ish world of whiteboards and sticky notes. Your comment triggered in me a memory of reading Walter Murch's book. Walter Murch is one of the greatest film editors of all time, and he wrote a wonderful book called In the Blink of an Eye, which Jelle and I had both read, of course, as one does. And Walter Murch is one of Jelle's heroes, so that's fun. And it triggered a memory of Walter Murch, who used to print out stills from each scene and stick them up on a wall. So your sticky note comment made me think of that, and then I copied that system. And Jelle's edit, he had a little edit house in his garden, like a garden shack, but converted into an edit room. And he had a window that usually had blinds in front of it, because usually you don't want sunlight coming in while you edit. But we actually stuck them on the window, and the sunlight coming through turned it into sort of a light box. So I had all these printed out frames of the scene, and it worked. And I think Jelle and I spent 2 days editing the film without touching the computer at all. I mean, literally just moving cards around on the board. And writers, certainly film writers will recognize this kind of thing, having a cork board that you move scenes around when you're still writing the production, not face masks. But this was doing it during the edit, and it's definitely something that I will and have incorporated into the Longship method of being able to do that. It was fantastic, especially in this sort of non-linear narrative style. I mean, if you're just following a script, that's easy. It's not. If you're following a script that has this flow, you build the story. But documentary editors will also know, putting together a story just out of a mountain of scenes that don't have their own linear progression is a whole different beast. And this was a wonderful way of doing it. So it was one of those moments of synergy between the corporate-y, agile-y, and it's funny because since then I've done more corporate work, filming corporate works, and I've filmed a lot of scrums. It felt very scrummish, this moving bits of paper around. So that was quite funny.
Love it. So we will put in the show notes in early April where people can watch the film on the Indian festival.
I'll see if I can dig up a picture of those pictures on the wall. That'd be quite fun.
And if you find that, we can put that in the show notes as well, because it's for me, I thought it was a beautifully creative moment just to watch you guys wrestle over these little cards on the window, and that was a lot of fun, because you even had some color codes on it. Like there was definitely a method going on there. That there was not only we had Joe's through line, and then we had Rachel's through line, and then we had the scenes of the breakup and the scenes of happier times, and very much so very systematic. So I think we've probably teased enough about exposure.
Okay,
and I think the trailer, which is almost finished, we can include a link to that as well. You're
not supposed to say that 2 years after it premiered, I've only just finished the trailer.
Well, that's been delightful for me as well these last couple of days, because it brings it all back. It's lovely, and
that's true.
And for me, this is it's all part of that journey. And so the Longship method did not start in Edinburgh.
No,
I'm almost convinced it did. But
Edinburgh. Yes, that was you talking to Rupert. Yes,
yeah.
To Mark Rupert.
I was on an episode with Mark Rupert from the 48 Hour Film Project, telling the story, and I mentioned Edinburgh, and you were editing that, and then you came back and I've never been there, so I would love to hear the actual origin story. How did this start? And then I'll paint a little bit of my perspective.
Okay, well, it wasn't Edinburgh; it was Cardiff. Okay. So yes, it was a town in one of the countries of the United Kingdom, but it wasn't Scotland; it was Wales.
Okay. Well, so that's for an American, that's close enough, right? That's in the region. Is that?
Yes, no. It's about 900 miles. It's like next door.
Yeah, okay.
It was in Cardiff. I was in Cardiff, where a short film of mine was playing. Stiltegebied, or Resting Place is the English title. It was playing there. And I went over there with Dion, my wife, and we took a long weekend, and it was like we had a sort of a city break or whatever it's called, and went to the festival to watch my film. And this festival had their own unique sort of. I'm afraid the festival didn't make it. It doesn't exist anymore, which was a shame. I think that was their third season, and I think they only did another one, and then they ran out of funds, which was a shame because they were really lovely people. I think it was the Cardiff Independent Film Festival, something like that. Anyway, we went, and they screened in a slightly different way. So instead of having shorts blocks and features, so most festivals will screen a bunch of shorts as a sort of block, because watching a 10-minute film and then, filing into a cinema, watching a 10-minute film and then a 10-minute film and then leaving, that's not much fun. So they will bundle together a bunch and usually make about an hour and a half worth of films. So you'll watch 5 to 7 short films, depending on how long they are, and they'll usually try to program some 20-minute ones and some 10-minute ones, and if maybe even some shorter ones if they can get them. But this festival did it differently. They paired up shorts and features. So you would go into your screening and you'd watch a short film and then a feature film, or 2 short films and then a feature film, which I thought was a great way of doing it, and a very interesting way of doing it. So I sat there in this room watching my film and a feature film, and there were 5 people in the room. Me and my wife, the filmmaker who made the feature film and his wife, and 1 visitor. which is hilarious. So we watched, my short film, and then we watched the film, and the film turned out to be made in a really weird and wonderful and special way by this French filmmaker. And the 5 of us went to dinner, because this and the chap who was watching the film turned out to be an actor who's actually doing really, really well now. I forget his name, but he's in a bunch of English movies now, so fair play to him. Anyway, we went to dinner, and this Frenchman was telling me about how he made his film, and he made his film and he shot it in a day, one day. Now, he did write the story, so he wrote a script that was possible to shoot in a day, and it's this story about this woman, and her daughter gets kidnapped, and she has a phone earpiece in her ear, and she's getting instructions from this disembodied voice in her ear who's talking to her, and she's running around a park. So the entire film basically takes place in this one park with this woman basically running backwards and forwards. And it's got a sort of Saw vibe, like being manipulated. It's kind of a thrillery, horror-y thing. There's a twist at the end. And they shot it, I think, in about 8 or 9 hours. So a bunch of hours in the park. And it was shot handheld. It was shot on a video camera. It was supposed to look like very, found footagey, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a pretty decent film. I mean, it won a bunch of prizes, and it was lovely. And it got me thinking, like, fair play to him for trying to figure out a different way of making films other than the conventional go out, find a star, find a bunch of money, which takes forever. And then Chris, you and I were chatting, and I think we were talking about how 4 years after The Right Juice came out, how much work it still was, dealing with distribution things and what have you, and how we were still involved in this in The Right Juice and doing quite a lot of sort of effort for that, and not actually turning that effort into making something new. And I said, well, hey, maybe there's something we can do. And I started thinking about, how could we do our version or my version of a fresh approach to filmmaking, taking massive amounts of inspiration from my experience in the 48, which is the kind of tie-in with Mark Rupert. In a lot of ways, the 48 was my film school as a director. I did quite a few different 48s in various different countries and used them to learn as much as to make cool films. So that's kind of the origin story. Cardiff, not Edinburgh.
I got a lot of it, right? Other than the country. But anyways, can you describe the Longship method in your words? And then I'll jump in and give a little bit my perspective, because what I love working about with you is we jive, but you have a very creative perspective, and I have more of the commercial perspective, and we bring them together. So I'd love to hear your description of the Longship approach now that we've done 2 features, and then I'll jump in with mine.
So I think the core of the idea is to reduce the total amount of time that it takes to create a film, to bring it into a very, very manageable time frame in which one can throw energy into the project, ride that wave of energy and creativity and joy, and then complete the project within one cycle of effort. Feature film production in the classic sense, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. It works, and great films are made. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel and say it has to be done in a different way. We're just trying to offer another way of doing it, create another way of doing it, not the other way of doing it. But feature film production is very much a marathon. Well, it's more than a marathon. It's like running a bunch of marathons with rest breaks in between, because you sort of develop an idea and a concept, and you ride that wave of energy, and then you try and pitch it and try and sell it, and you can go down in energy, and then you have to sort of conserve your energy, and then you start to write it, and then off you go, then you try and finance it. And there's all these waves of actual making that go on, which works and which are fine, but those are also expensive. They take their toll, and they take a lot of time. So this was about how can we actually just do the whole thing in one wave, like a 48. A 48 is one wave of burst of energy, taking, it takes 3 days, really. 48 hours is sort of 3 days of your life. How can we do that for a feature film? And I was looking at what are the building blocks of filmmaking. What are the main steps that we do? Well, step one is writing, obviously, developing a story and writing a script. I consider that one sort of period. Then pre-production, then production, then post-production, then distribution. Of those, the one that is the most, that often takes the longest time and is the most unpredictable as to how long it will take is actually the first one. So, people who aren't in filmmaking often think of filmmaking as being lots of people running around with a camera and blowing up cars. And that bit, actually, the actual production is often the shortest span of time. It's the one that involves the most people and the most doing. There's lots and lots of doing in it, but it's often the shortest. It's almost always the shortest period of time. Second shortest being pre-production. Third shortest being post-production. Fourth shortest often being distribution, although that is kind of fluid as well. But the longest is often the writing. I mean, a lot of scripts take 2 or 3 years to write from the moment that somebody thinks, hey, I'm going to write a script to them actually starting to film, if they ever get there. And some scripts, like, The King's Speech, take upwards of 60 years from concept to shooting. Others, I know filmmakers that are walked around with a script in their back pocket for 10 years. Albert van Strien, a colleague, filmmaker of mine here, just completed his feature film last year. And that was a script that he developed from the short film that he made when he was in college. And he's my age. He was a friend of Eric's, actually. So he walked around with that script for 30 years. Or 20 years before he could get it financed, etc., etc. So I said, well, how can we remove that chunk of time? Or how can we integrate that chunk of time into one wave of energy? And the answer was, well, don't write a script, which goes against all of my principles, which is quite fun, because I think that the script is the thing, as do many filmmakers. Everything starts with a good script. So how can you take that out of the equation? Well, you can't, but obviously you could try. You can go and do it. So the concept of longship production is to get a bunch of people, a small team of people, of highly professional people, no assistants. Everybody who's in the team is the head of their own department. And if we need an assistant, one is each other's assistants. There are actors in the team, there's a writer in the team, there's a director in the team, there's a cinematographer in the team, there's an art director in the team, there's a producer in the team. That's the minimum. 1 or 2 extras can be added. For example, we took the editor with us on the second portion of Longship, which was amazing to have the editor on set. And you go to a place, and the idea is to go to a place that is uncomfortable, as in not in your backyard, so not where all those people live. preferably another country, so that there's some sort of distance between the makers and the place, so that they're looking with open eyes to a place. I mean, you look very differently at an environment when you're a guest there, and it's a different country and people speak a different language, than when it's your own town or a different state for people in America, or the other side of the country. And you go with a concept, you go with a core idea of what the film could be. With Second Honeymoon, our writer actually had 2 or 3 core ideas in her back pocket. And then you allow the place that you are and the people that you are with to help the decision-making process of what the story is going to be and how the story is going to evolve. So the shorthand of that, and I remember you trying to describe that to Rupert, the idea is normally we will write a script and then we go out into the world and try and make the world fit the script that we've written. We either find the right location, or we build the right location, or we build something in a studio, or whatever it is. We shape the universe, we shape the world to fit what we have envisioned in the script, or what the writer has envisioned in the script. And the idea here is much more to let the world influence the story. So instead of, well, we have this scene and it's a breakup scene and it must take place in a vineyard, we know that at some point these 2 characters are going to break up. And as we progress through the shooting and the making, the location for that to happen presents itself. And then you adapt the ideas to the location and back and forth, which leads to some wonderful happy coincidences if you're open for them, and leads to ways of telling a story that one doesn't even imagine when you start. In fact, in Second Honeymoon, that process led to the genre changing halfway through the shooting for the better, which was great because we weren't stuck into this script. I mean, the problem with a script sometimes is that's the script that everybody signed off on. You have to produce the script as it was written because that's the script that you got financed, and that's the script that the actors said yes to, and that's the script that the distributors said yes to. It's that script. You can't change the script and shoot a different movie as you're going along because that's the one that everybody wants you to make, which is great and fine. And this is different. This is another way of doing that.
It is a marvelous other way. And I like what you said earlier, that it was not a better way. It's just another way. And it's another way which is being discovered. From a commercial perspective, what really triggered me was because we made The Right Juice, which needed to be made. And I love that we made it in more of a traditional way. So it was, and therefore it was kind of large and kind of expensive and carried a bit more risk to it. And so when I was hearing your story about what has now evolved into the method you just described, I was thinking, okay, well, cost and risk are reduced. Maybe there's more risk, but it's minimized. And so as long as everyone who's involved is aware of, it's more contained into, because if you did this method with 100-person team, that would be a different thing as opposed to a 10-person team.
That would be stupid.
Yeah, right. And that's why also I think that this isn't for every type of film. This needs to be really a human, I call it human narrative.
Well, I mean, as you said to Mark, there are films that you cannot make in this way. You cannot make a costume drama in this way because that requires a huge amount of preparation and costumes, and you have to know what the characters are wearing. You cannot do an action movie because that's dangerous. You need all the bits in place for safety. You cannot make a science fiction movie because you mostly need elaborate sets. Although there are science fiction stories, Looper comes to mind. There are science fiction stories that you could have created in this way. So, it's not genre more than shape. Yeah,
and again, coming from my corporate IT perspective, it was really just striking me that this was very much in the world of Agile, which comes from software development. And Agile is a bit the values and mindset, and Scrum and extreme programming. And there's a lot of other actual techniques to it. But if we just look at Agile as the high level approach, and there's the 4 values of Agile, which like individuals, interactions over processes and tools. I see that in this, where instead of forcing everyone into these steps, you're enabling and almost have these, I call them retrospectives or discussions in the evening, where people are able to say, hey, that felt really good, or that was horrible for me, or there's this human interaction that was then able to be brought on board.
Yeah, one of the things about that, sorry to jump in on the first Agile point, one of the things that's wonderful is that the actors are very much part of creating the story for their characters. And I remember Sitze, who was in the first film, being asked in a Q&A, wasn't that horrible? I mean, how could you prep your character? And he said, I didn't need to prep my character. I just became the character from the get-go. And because it was this short, contained, powerful period of time, I mean, you couldn't do that for 100 days, but it was 6 days. So he just became the character for 6 days, basically, meaning that anything that we threw at him, any situation that suddenly arose, the character just reacted as the character. And all the actors found that. And they found actually quite a lot of liberation in doing it that way. And then they were part of giving feedback on, hey, the story feels like it's going in this direction. It doesn't feel right. My character, I want to go this direction. And we could take that on board, which you couldn't do if you were stuck to a script. So, yeah, very much so.
And the reason I love that is when I build teams, I really work for inclusivity and interaction. And I think sometimes in the traditional way of movie making, actors can be sort of movable props. And now these people are really actually collaborators, which I think is kind of cool.
So, yeah.
And then another one of the values from Agile is working software over comprehensive documentation. And you already explained that. Instead of having this big script and a shooting script and it's really focusing on telling the story. And so in this case, working story, I would call, instead of working software. Mm-hmm. That sort of works for me.
I'd almost say there's a part to it that is finding the story rather than telling the story, and that's kind of fun as well. Sorry, carry on. I keep interrupting you. It's me.
No, I love it. It's again, this is what the joy for me of these moments is. It's a collision of two extremely different worlds, and it's a discovering of how to take advantage of very corporate-y, techie, bureaucratic type stuff, and trying to bring it into another space, and then. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation.
Number three.
Number three, and there you could. The way I remember it is the writer and editor should be on team, and that for me is sort of the voice of the customer. Meaning, if the writer with the director and the rest of the team are working to tell that story for an audience. This is for me that direct connection and try to keep the sort of a continuity of spirit, if you will. And the last one is responding to change over following a plan. And this method is exactly that. You're setting up the space to respond to serendipity, synchronicity, stuff that happens.
Yes.
And as you
but
learn,
with an end goal in mind, I think that's very important. This is actually a very important point. I remember I was talking about this method at a panel discussion, and I got very hostile attacks from some members of the audience, which was good because then your ideas get challenged. But I remember somebody saying, "Well, getting a bunch of people and going on vacation and coming back with a video. We've all done that. I mean, that's nothing special." And it was like, yeah, well, it's not that, because there's a goal. The goal is, to make a movie. And a movie is, 80 to 90 to 100 minutes long, although exposure is only 50, but it still works. But to make a movie, to have it something that other people would want to see, to tell a story, and you go with some idea of the story that you could or would want to tell. So it's not quite just sticking a bunch of people hippy dippy doopy and we'll see what comes out. It's more like the 48, where even though when you start the 48 you don't have a script, you do create a script or a storyline or a framework to then go and do. I mean, nobody would accuse the 48 of being just get a bunch of people together and just shoot random stuff. No, I mean, you go in and you create the plan. It's just the time scale in which you create the plan and execute.
Yeah.
So I find that, so that's very important.
And drawing on other things, on one of the reasons why Agile doesn't work in corporate land is oftentimes the maturity of the team members.
Wait a minute. Agile doesn't work? Why are we? What? You didn't tell me that.
Agile rarely works.
Oh, okay.
Usually it just deconstructs. And
I'm going to tell that young lady in Australia who's writing a book on Agile filmmaking.
Well, be very cautious. Yeah, because
anyway, so sorry, I interrupted you again. You were saying one of the reasons why Agile doesn't work in corporate land is
maturity and the expertise of the team. So in order for Agile to work, there's an extremely high level of autonomy. I think film land already has that, because typically these are experts that know their job, and they're, but
certainly indie film land.
Yeah, fair enough. And so this isn't something you can do with a bunch of starters, because you need to be able to rely on experts at their craft. And then
absolutely, it's SEAL Team 6, not 5th Platoon.
Right.
It's very much
And to weave in some other, I guess, corporate terminology is if the story was sort of an epic, and that, so if you're going to build a piece of software that has a job to be done. In corporate land, people don't just put a bunch of developers together and say, go have fun, go on a holiday and come back with what you have. Well, sometimes they do, but that's like an innovation thing. But so there's actually this is what we intend to do. So there's an idea, and you've attached a writer and editor, and there's the concepts. And then there's almost like every day is a sprint then, meaning a sprint has a clear goal. We know what we want to do tomorrow. We've prepared the day before. We're going to review afterwards. We're going to learn, and we're going to, and so it's, it's not a perfect one-to-one one match, smashing Agile and Scrum to filmmaking, but there's a lot of principles and values which are shared, which is delightful to see. So, last question, and then we're running out of time, unless you've got any questions back for me. But what's next? What's next with Longship and Agile filmmaking?
Well, definitely. I mean, the momentum of developing the system did get a little bit of a dent because of the way that exposure was created. It took longer than the plan is supposed to, but also that's fine. We're learning and developing. And what's next is we go make another one. As soon as we come out, the world comes out of lockdown, and it is possible. I think it's not wise right now, unless we go to Texas, which is open apparently. It's not wise right now to go running around like this. There is a lot of film production going on, but with strict COVID guidelines and COVID officers on set and stuff like that. Well, by its very nature, we cannot, Longship cannot work in that way. So we should not do it. But when we can again, we should definitely go out again and fire up a new team, go make another amazing something. So
make an amazing film
keep
thing.
Developing.
And I think the invitation is we can make a good, potentially great narrative story, human story, feature length, for say between $50,000 and $100,000 or euros. And so I think if there's also someone who has such a story that isn't really strict to a script, that wants to allow that universe
just has
to
a
tell
concept
the story,
or a story,
then
or a place. If you've got
also,
or a place, if you've got an amazing castle somewhere and some spare change lying around, and you'd love to have a movie made in your castle, this is perfect. This is a low risk way of achieving a goal like that, and we can do it.
Great. And if you want more information, Kristjan is at least on LinkedIn and also at longshipfilms.com. So Kristjan,
correct.
Thank you so much.
You are so welcome.
Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite player, and download the Simplicity Kit from Ebullient.com.